Dawn breaks over Draven's pass, and the 9th Solitary Legion stands where it stood the night before, though half the men who held that ground yesterday are gone. Commander Marcus Valerius counts the fires below the ridge and finds the same problem he found at dusk. The numbers only grow, and the men on his side of the valley do not. 6 days ago, this outpost guarded a border nobody in Rome bothered to name. Now it holds the last organized resistance between the Ash Confederacy and the open roads south. Valerius did not choose this position for its glory. He chose it because the pass narrows here, because a smaller force can hold a narrow gate longer than an open field, and because someone has to buy time for a message that may never arrive. That message is the pattern that should not exist. 4 nights ago, Valerius sent his fastest rider south, with orders for the garrison at the river crossing, a plea for reinforcement written twice, so no misreading could excuse a delay. The rider did not return. 2 nights ago, he sent a second rider, this one along the eastern game trail, avoiding the road entirely, carrying the same plea folded into a smaller, harder case meant to survive a fall from the saddle. That rider did not return either. By any ordinary rule of war, 1 lost messenger is bad luck. 2, along 2 different paths, at 2 different hours, is something else. It means the roads themselves have already fallen, and no one told the men still holding the gate. Valerius has not said this aloud. Saying it would confirm what every centurion under him has already guessed, but refuses to speak into the cold morning air. Rome is not coming. Not today, and likely not at all. The empire's attention sits elsewhere, on richer provinces and louder crises, and a border legion of a few thousand men guarding a pass with no name has never been anyone's priority. That silence from the south is not an accident of distance. It is the shape of an empire choosing where it spends its strength, and choosing, without ever saying so, to spend it somewhere else. He walks the ridge in the gray light, boots finding the same stones they found the day before, and studies his own men the way he studies the enemy. Captain Oren Tal is sharpening a blade that does not need sharpening again. The motion less about the edge and more about keeping his hands from shaking. Cassian Vale stands near the supply carts, doing the quiet arithmetic every soldier does before a battle he expects to lose. How many arrows remain? How many men can still lift a shield? How many hours until the water runs out? None of them ask Valerius the question directly. They ask it with their eyes, and he has no answer that will not sound like a lie. Below the ridge, the Ash Confederacy has stopped hiding its numbers. For 6 days, their scouts kept to the tree line, testing the Legion's discipline with small raids meant to draw out a reckless charge. That caution is gone this morning. Their warbands sit in the open, fires burning in long, uneven rows that stretch farther than they did the day before, farther than Valerius wants to count. This is the second half of the impossible pattern, the one that turns a bad situation into a closing trap. Every night the enemy grows, and every night the Legion does not. A siege that should exhaust the larger force instead feeds it, because more clans arrive with each rumor that Rome has abandoned this stretch of border to its fate. Valerius understands what that means for the coming hours, even if he has not shaped it into words his men can hear yet. This is not a battle that ends in reinforcement, because reinforcement is not coming. It is not a battle that ends in retreat, because there is no ground behind them worth retreating to. And a broken legion running south would only lead the Confederacy straight to the undefended towns Rome actually cares about. The only shape left for this fight is the one he has not yet allowed himself to name out loud, the one where holding the gate matters more than winning it, and where the value of the 9th Solitary Legion is measured not in a victory it cannot achieve, but in every hour it refuses to let go. He does not tell them that yet. There is still the morning ritual to keep, the illusion of an ordinary day to preserve for a little longer, because a legion that believes it is fighting for rescue fights differently than a legion that knows it is fighting for time. Valerius turns from the ridge, walks back toward his officers, and begins giving orders as if reinforcement were still 2 questions away from certain, knowing that every order he gives now will have to answer for itself later, without help, without a lie left standing. Valerius reaches his officers before the questions catch up to him, and the first one comes from Centurion Marcus Faelius, a broad man who has served longer than any other on this stretch of border. He asks about the smoke, not the campfires ringing the valley, which every man has already counted 20 times over, but a second column rising from the eastern pass, thinner and darker, the kind that comes from green wood burned too fast. Valerius had noticed it at dawn and filed it away as nothing. Now he sends 2 riders to confirm what it means, because a column like that only rises when someone is building something large in a hurry. And armies that already outnumber you do not usually need to build anything at all. The riders come back before the sun clears the second ridge, and their report kills the easiest explanation first. It is not a funeral pyre for warriors lost in some skirmish with a rival clan, which would have meant the Confederacy was still fighting itself somewhere out of sight and buying the Legion a few more hours of division in the enemy camp. It is timber, stripped and lashed, stacked into shapes too regular to be firewood. Siege ladders, or something close enough to serve the same purpose against a ridgeline instead of a wall. The eastern pass was supposed to be the one route too narrow and too steep for any large force to use. The reason Valerius placed his weakest sentry there instead of his strongest. That assumption is the second thing the smoke burns away this morning. He does not let the shift show on his face, but he feels the ground move under the whole plan. If the Confederacy can climb the eastern approach with ladders, then the ridge is not 1 gate to hold, it is 2, and the Legion does not have the numbers to hold both at full strength. Every explanation he had built for why this position was defensible depended on the enemy attacking where he expected them to attack. That was always the actual question underneath the obvious one. Not, can the Legion survive the numbers in front of them, but can it survive an enemy who studies ground the way a Roman engineer would? And the smoke says the answer to that has just changed. Faelius asks the question every centurion is thinking. Pull the weak century back from the eastern pass now, before the ladders arrive, and consolidate everyone along the main ridge where the Legion's shields still form one unbroken line. Valerius almost gives the order. Then he stops, because that choice carries its own cost, one the ridge itself taught him the day before. Pull the eastern sentry back, and the pass stands open. And an open pass behind the Legion's flank is worse than a weak line holding it, however thin that line is.
Reinforcement is a rumor now, but supply is not, and the last wagons of grain and arrows are still coming up that same eastern track from the depot 2 valleys south. Close the pass to the enemy, and he also closes it to himself. So the choice he faces is not the clean one Peleus offered. It is a narrower one, and a worse one. Hold the eastern pass with too few men to survive a real assault. Keep the supply line open for as long as luck allows, and accept that when the ladders reach the top, that sentry dies, buying time for a wagon train that may or may not still be moving. Or abandon the pass, save the men on it, and gamble that the Legion can fight the entire battle on stored rations and whatever arrows are already inside the perimeter. Valerius chooses the first, and he chooses it out loud this time, in front of Peleus and the 2 other officers who have gathered by then, because a decision this heavy cannot survive as something only he knows. He orders reinforcement forward to the eastern sentry instead, stripping men from the center of the main line to do it. And every man who hears the order understands exactly what has been traded for what. The center is thinner now. The eastern flank is stronger, but not strong enough to hold forever, only long enough to matter. Valerius has just answered the question the smoke asked him, and in doing so, he has opened a second one that the ridge has not finished asking yet. Peleus is the first to ask the question out loud, though everyone on that stretch of the line has already felt it. The barbarian center surges forward the moment the eastern reinforcement finishes moving. Not before, not after. A coincidence would explain one match of timing. It cannot explain the second, when the enemy drums shift cadence within 100 heartbeats of the last man reaching the ridge. Valerius rules out the easy answer first. No rider carried word across that distance in that time, and no signal fire burned on the Roman side to give the order away. If the timing is real and not imagined by exhausted men staring too long at smoke, then something inside the Legion's own movements is visible to a commander who should not be able to see them at all. He sends 2 scouts down the goat track behind the ridge to check the obvious explanation, that the dust from the grain wagons is rising high enough to read from the valley floor like a signal of its own. The scouts come back within the hour, and the answer costs him more than the question did. The dust is visible, plainly, from a rise the barbarians have already occupied, and it has been visible since before dawn. That closes one explanation and opens a worse one. Nobody needs a spy inside the camp when the terrain itself is doing the spy's work, broadcasting every shift in the Legion's supply and every gap it leaves behind. Valerius orders the wagon path shifted to the low ground on the far side of the ridge, a route that adds most of an hour to every run, and the men driving those wagons will now make that climb under a sky that is about to fill with arrows. He has traded time for concealment, and concealment for risk to the drivers, and every trade like that draws down a reserve of luck that was never large to begin with. What the dust explains is the enemy's timing. It does not explain the enemy's patience. A raiding horde reacts to what it sees. It does not read a formation and calculate what a weakened center means for the whole line. And yet, that is exactly what the second wave of barbarian movement suggests. A shift of spearmen toward the exact stretch Valerius stripped bare an hour earlier. Peleus offers the comfortable version first, that the enemy simply outnumbers them enough to probe everywhere and get lucky somewhere. Valerius does not accept it, because luck does not reposition 300 men in formation without a reason behind it. Somewhere across that valley stands a commander who read the eastern reinforcement as a signal and answered it correctly. And that means the Legion is not facing a tide, whatever the terrified sentry on the ridge called it at dawn. It is facing a mind. The war leader the scouts have named Odemar in their reports is not a rumor anymore. He is a variable Valerius has to plan around, and planning around a mind is far harder than planning around a mass. Understanding that costs Valerius something he cannot get back.
Telling the officers gathered around him that the enemy is being led with intelligence rather than numbers alone would steady some of them and break the rest. And there is no way to know in advance which men fall into which group. He decides to hold the knowledge close, sharing it only with Phallius, who takes it the way a soldier takes a wound he already expected. The decision is small on its face and enormous underneath it, because Valerius has just chosen to carry the truth of the battle alone, rather than let it spread through the ranks unmanaged. And one makes that choice permanent the moment he speaks it into a private conversation instead of a public order. He cannot walk it back to ignorance for himself, and he cannot walk it back into secrecy once even one more officer overhears it by accident. The ridge itself has stopped being the only enemy in front of him. Somewhere below, a man just as aware of the stakes as he is has already started planning the next move, and Valerius has no way to see it coming until it lands. The scout who brings word to Valerius at first light does not describe an army moving. He describes fires. Along the barbarian flanks, torches burn in tight, even rows, the kind of order a man sets when he wants them counted from a distance. At the center, where the mass of warriors gathered at dusk, the fires have gone dark. Valerius had read that darkness as exhaustion, men sleeping off the noise of the night before the noise of the morning. Phallius reads it differently, and once he says it aloud, Valerius cannot unread it. A center that goes quiet while both flanks stay lit is not resting. It is being emptied. That single correction erases the plan Valerius built through the night. He had assumed a tidal assault, one wave crashing straight into the Legion's wall, strength against strength, the kind of fight Rome has weathered 100 times on other ridges. The dark center tells him that assumption was wrong, and wrong assumptions do not get gentler the longer a man holds them. If the middle of Odemar's line is thinning, the strike is not coming from the front. It is coming from one side, maybe both, aimed at folding around the Legion's shoulders while the center holds them in place like a hand pressing a man still before the knife finds him. Valerius orders reserves pulled from behind the standard and pushed to the flanks before the sun fully clears the hills. And the moment he gives that order, the center of his own line loses the depth that was supposed to catch anything that broke through. He has traded one danger for another, because the old danger stopped being real the instant the fires told him so. One does not forgive that trade. Once those men are marching toward the flanks, there is no folding them back to the center in time if the dark fires turn out to be a trick within a trick. Roman commanders in Valerius's own service have a name for this kind of read, drilled into every officer who trains under the Eagle standard rather than learns war from stories. They call it counting the silence, watching for what an enemy stops doing rather than what he starts. It is doctrine older than Valerius. Canon he trusts the way he trusts the weight of his own sword, and it has never once misled him
before this morning. That is what makes the next thought so hard to carry.
Phallius asks, quietly, whether Odomar knows that Roman officers count silence too, and whether the dark center is a message built for men trained exactly as Valerius was trained. Understanding the enemy's mind was supposed to be an advantage. Now it might be the very channel Odomar is using to move him. Valerius says nothing to the ranks reforming on the flanks, but he says something to himself that he cannot walk back. He no longer knows if he is reading Odomar, or if Odomar is reading him, reading Odomar. The proof arrives before noon, dragged up the slope by two auxiliaries who caught a barbarian runner slipping along the base of the ridge. The man carries no weapon worth mentioning, and no message worth torturing out of him. Only a length of knotted cord, each knot spaced to mark a distance, each color of thread marking a different section of the Roman line. Valerius spreads it across his palm and understands it faster than he wants to. This is not a plan for a flank strike alone. The cord marks both shoulders of the legion, and a narrow gap behind the standard where the reserves used to stand before he moved them. Odomar is not aiming to break the line. He is aiming to close around it, flank and flank meeting behind the eagle itself, and the dark center fires were never a feint against one side. They were bait for the whole shape of the legion's defense. The question Valerius has been answering since dawn, how to survive the charge in front of him, was never the real question. The real one is whether an army this size can be prevented from closing a circle around men who have already given up their reserve to stop a strike that was only half the truth. Oren Tau reaches him before he finishes folding the cord into his palm, and Valerius does not waste the arrival on ceremony. He hands over the knotted length and watches the captain's face do the same math his own face did a moment ago. Tal turns the cord once, twice, then asks the question Valerius has been avoiding since the runner's capture. Why would Odomar risk a single unarmed man to hand them the shape of his own attack? A scout who slips and gets caught delivers an accident. A scout who carries a coded map and no weapon delivers a message. Valerius eliminates the first explanation on the spot. This was never a leak. It was placed in their hands on purpose, and a plan that wants to be found is not a plan at all. It is bait wearing the shape of a discovery. That leaves a colder possibility standing where the first one fell. If Odomar wanted the legion to see the double flank and the gap behind the standard, he wanted Valerius to react to it, to spend men closing a door that might not be the door under real threat. Understanding the enemy's intentions was supposed to buy time. Instead, it forces a choice with no safe branch. Ignore the cord, and if it is true, the circle closes around the eagle by midday. Believe the cord, and pull men from the center to guard the shoulders. And if the fires were never a feint, but the actual point of attack, the middle collapses the moment it is thinnest. Every answer he reaches for now costs him something he cannot get back. And one has taught him that much already. No order given under this sun rides for free. He gives the order anyway, because standing still costs more than moving wrong. 2 centuries shift from the depleted reserve toward the gap behind the standard, closing the space Odomar's cord marked as the seam. Tal does not argue the order, but he flags the price out loud, the way a good second does. Pulling those men thins the center by 1/3. If the barbarian charge splits and drives hard at the middle instead of the flanks, the Legion will meet it with fewer shields than it had at dawn. Valerius hears the number and does not flinch, because flinching now would cost the men watching him more than the number itself. The runner is questioned once more before noon, briefly, without violence, because Valerius wants a voice, not a confession beaten into shape. The man says nothing in Latin and little in his own tongue, but his eyes go to the ridgeline twice, then to the valley floor once. And a soldier trained to read silence the way Valerius has been trained, reads that as a third location, neither flank nor center. Somewhere along the base of the ridge, past the tree line his scouts already reported empty, something is waiting that the cord never marked at all. The knots showed him a shape complete enough to trust and incomplete enough to kill him for trusting it. The real question was never how to survive the charge in front of him, or even how to stop the circle closing behind the eagle.
It is whether he can hold 3 points at once with a legion that was only ever built to defend 2. Valerius sends a rider toward the tree line anyway, not because he expects an answer before the horns sound, but because refusing to look costs more than the 10 minutes it takes to be told nothing. Tal watches the rider go and says the thing neither of them wanted spoken aloud: that if Odemar planned this many layers before a single Roman blade left its sheath, then the man commanding the horde below has spent longer studying this legion than this legion has spent studying him. Valerius does not answer. He only turns back toward the center, now thinner than it was an hour ago, and toward the ridge that may or may not be hiding the shape no cord ever showed him. And he understands, with the particular dread of a man who has just made himself right, that every clear thought he has had since dawn has moved his men somewhere Odemar wanted them moved. The rider comes back sooner than 10 minutes, and that alone tells Valerius something before the man opens his mouth. He has not reached the tree line.
He has reached the near slope and turned around, and the reason is smoke, thin and low, curling up from a stretch of scrub that should not burn on its own in the wet grass of an early spring dawn. Tal reads it the same way Valerius does. Fire set deliberately means hands nearby to set it, and hands nearby mean the empty tree line his scouts reported was never empty at all, only patient. The first acknowledgement dies right there. This was never a hidden reserve waiting to charge the flank. It is a screen, built to blind the ridge from whatever waits behind that smoke, and a screen only makes sense if something on the other side needs hiding badly enough to burn ground for it. Valerius orders 2 sentries pulled from the weakened center to cover the base of the ridge, and the cost lands before the order finishes echoing down the line. Tal says it plainly: pull from the center now, and the center that already thinned once this morning may not hold when the horns finally sound. Valerius does not argue the math. He simply weighs one collapse against another and chooses the one he can still see coming.
That is the second cost of understanding Odemar's mind. Every answer bought here is bought with men taken from somewhere else, because one holds in this legion the way it holds everywhere in this war. Nothing given back reappears free. The 2 centuries move, and the center gets thinner, and there is no undoing that thinning once boots have left the ground. The knotted cord comes out again, and this time Valerius reads it differently than he did an hour before. The shape he trusted at dawn assumed 2 flanks and a center. the training every officer under him was raised on since his father's service and before. Cassian Vale had insisted, back when the cord system was first drilled into these cohorts, that the Legion which can only see 2 points will eventually meet an enemy who understood that limitation before the enemy ever crossed a border. Valerius had thought that a lecture for recruits. Standing on this ridge, it stops being an old man's caution and becomes the exact shape of what is happening to him. The cord was never wrong. It was only ever built for a smaller war than the one Odemar brought. Understanding that costs Valerius something sharper than manpower.
It costs him certainty. A commander who has just proven the enemy is 3 moves ahead starts hearing 3 moves in every silence after that, and silence is most of what a battlefield gives before the horns. He catches himself reading meaning into a bird lifting off the ridge scrub, into a horse shifting weight in the barbarian line, into nothing at all, and he has to physically stop his hand from ordering a 3rd redeployment on evidence no better than a hunch dressed as insight. Tal notices the hesitation and says nothing, which is its own kind of warning, because Tal only stays quiet when he is choosing not to make things worse. The smoke thickens, then breaks apart into drifting streams as the morning wind picks up off the valley floor, and through the gaps, the 2 sentries at the ridge base finally see what the scream was hiding. Not warriors massed for a flank rush. Wagons, a dozen or more, pushed up close under cover of the fire and now visible at the tree line's edge, heavy enough to need oxen, arranged in a line that has nothing to do with any charge Valerius has ever drilled against. The original question was never simply where the 3rd strike lands. It was what kind of war Odemar intends to fight at all. And the answer, forming in front of Valerius, now looks less like a battle plan and more like a siege line drawn around men who have nowhere left to retreat to. The wagons answer a question Valerius has been asking since the horns first sounded, and the answer reorganizes everything that came before it without making any of it wrong. He had read Odemar's opening moves as the shape of a battle. Feints on the left, pressure on the center, a reserve held back for the moment his line thinned. Every one of those readings was accurate. None of them was complete. A battle ends when one side breaks. A siege ends when one side starves. And the timber, now rolling into place under cover of smoke, was never meant to charge anything. It was meant to become a wall. Cassian Vale reaches him first with the count, breathless from the ridge run, confirming what the drifting smoke has already shown. 14 wagons, oxen still in harness, stacked with cut logs and packed earth, in bundles too uniform to be anything but prepared in advance, days in advance, long before the Legion ever took this ground. Odemar did not build a siege line this morning. He built it before Valerius chose the ridge at all, which means the ridge was never a trap sprung on the Legion, so much as a shape the Legion was walked into, one decision at a time, starting with the burned bridge at Calvena 3 days back. That bridge matters now in a way it did not before. Valerius ordered it dropped to slow Odemar's crossing, buying the Legion 2 days it desperately needed, and under the world's own accounting, that cost was paid honestly. 2 days gained, 1 crossing lost, nothing recoverable once the beams hit the river. What nobody weighed at the time was the second effect
of dropping a bridge. It did not only slow the barbarians, it sealed the legion's own retreat behind them. And Odamar's scouts would have watched that fire from the far bank and understood immediately what it meant for a legion with nowhere left to withdraw. The choice that saved them 2 days is the same choice that told their enemy exactly how to finish them. Nothing about that reversal breaks the rule the Legion has lived by since the first watchfire went out. It only shows the rule working in a direction nobody was tracking.
Livia Saren has her own confirmation. Grimmer for being medical rather than tactical. She has been rationing water since dawn on instinct, without orders, because the wounded were coming in faster than the wells could be trusted to last a normal engagement's length. She assumed she was preparing for a long day. She was, in fact, already preparing for what the wagons now confirm. A fight measured in the number of hours a closed perimeter can hold water and blood, not in the number of charges a line can absorb. Her caution was reasonable under the old interpretation, and insufficient under the true one, and she adjusts the ration downward again without being told to, because she has already done the arithmetic Valerius is only now catching up to. Tal says the thing everyone else is circling. If Odamar wanted the Legion dead by nightfall, spears would already be moving. A siege line takes hours to raise and days to matter, and no commander builds one unless he expects the men behind it to be there long enough to need it. That is not mercy. It is patience. And patience from the Ash Confederacy means Odamar has decided the Legion is worth more, starved into surrender, intact enough to be marched to Rome's gates as proof that the Empire's soldiers kneel, than it is worth as a battlefield count of Roman dead. Every fear Valerius carried through the night was correct in its shape and wrong in its size. He feared a battle he could not win. What waits behind the smoke is worse. A captivity engineered to outlast the Legion's will before it outlasts its supplies, and the dawn that once looked like the edge of a single decisive fight now looks like the first hour of something built to take much longer to kill them. Valerius does not answer at once. He studies the earthworks instead. Odamar's men have left a narrow strip of hard ground between the eastern ditch and the dry ravine. It is too exposed for an attack, too deliberate for a mistake. Beyond it, the smoke thins around a line of pack animals, grain, waterskins, timber. The Ash Confederacy is not waiting for the Legion to break in battle. It is closing every route except one, and that route leads away from the fort, toward the ravine. Cassian Vale sees it too. The young standard-bearer has spent the night counting enemy fires, and the count has never changed. The outer ring is meant to look unfinished, because Odamar wants the Romans to believe there is still a choice. Cassian points to the ravine, where 3 fresh stakes mark the ground. No sentries stand there. That silence is the warning. A path left open by an army this large is not an escape. It is a channel. Livia Saren brings Valerius the last sealed dispatch recovered from the broken courier wagon. The wax is cracked, but the message inside is clear enough. The nearest Roman force is not coming. It has turned south toward the river crossings, carrying engineers and grain. Valerius had believed the courier was trying to summon help. Livia reads the route again and finds the harder truth. The message was meant to warn the southern garrisons that the Haw Confederacy had abandoned the frontier road. Odamar's army is moving toward the interior, and this legion is the only force still standing between it and the crossings.
The original question had been how long the Romans could survive. Now Valerius asks what their survival would cost.
If the legion surrenders, Ottomar gains prisoners, supplies, and a clear road. If it stays inside the fort, thirst will do the work for him. The only useful ground lies beyond the walls, where the enemy expects frightened men to flee. That expectation is the mechanism behind every quiet fire, every unfinished trench, every guarded wagon. Ottomar has built a battle the Romans can lose without ever being forced to fight. Captain Oren Tal rejects the plan before Valerius speaks it. He has seen the ravine from the western tower. Its floor narrows near the old quarry, where carts cannot pass and a shield wall can hold for a short time. Short is enough, Valerius says. The legion will leave in 3 columns, with the wounded and water carts in the center. The first column will draw the Confederacy toward the ravine. The second will burn the grain stores. The third will take the southern road and carry the dispatch to the river garrisons. That choice turns the fort from a prison into a fuse. It also spends the legion. Once the gates open, they cannot close behind the retreating columns. The men who hold the rear will have no horses, no fresh water, and no route back. Tal volunteers to command them. Valerius refuses. Tal reminds him that the decision is not between life and death. It is between choosing who pays and pretending the cost does not exist. Valerius gives him the rear guard, then orders Cassian to carry the standard with the dispatch. Livia stays with the wounded until the last cart clears the gate. At first, Ottomar's army reacts exactly as planned. Horns rise from the eastern line. Riders sweep toward the ravine. The Romans appear to run. Then Cassian turns the standard sideways, the signal Valerius chose before dawn, and the first column wheels into the open ground. Roman javelins strike the men nearest the ditch. The second column reaches the wagons and sets the dry timber alight. Flames climb through grain sacks. The siege that was supposed to feed the captors becomes a wall of fire behind them. The Confederacy closes faster than Valerius calculated. Tal's rear guard reaches the quarry, and the narrow floor fills with shields, dust, and bodies. He holds long enough for the water carts to pass, then sends one final signal from the ridge. The road is open. Cassian and Livia disappear south with fewer than 100 soldiers. Valerius remains at the quarry because the legion cannot move and fight at once, and someone must keep Ottomar looking north. By sunset, the Roman fort is empty, its wells fouled and its stores burning. Ottomar has taken the position, but not the prisoners, grain, or road he needed. 3 days later, the southern garrisons receive Livia's dispatch and close the river crossings. The Ash army is forced to turn back toward the frontier, carrying its wounded instead of Roman captives. Rome is not saved from every threat. It is saved from this one because the last legion made its death costly enough to delay an army. Valerius does not survive the quarry. The standard does. Cassian plants it beside the river before the crossings are sealed, and the men who see it understand what the legion chose. Not victory and not surrender, but the only consequence Ottomar had failed to prepare for. The road into Rome is still there. The Ash army is no longer on it.